I'm Charlie Stripp,
Hi,
as you know. We've known each other for a long time. I'm the current president of the Mathematical Association, and what I'm doing during my presidency, as part of my presidency, I'm interviewing a few sort of influential people in maths education and in mathematics who can sort of think about some of the challenges that maths education faces. And I've identified three challenges. One is about improving attitudes to maths education. One is about we've got a chronic shortage of secondary maths teachers, and what might we do about that? And the third one is around embedding the good use of technology in maths teaching and learning, which historically we haven't done well in this country. Um, the reason I want to talk to you is because you've got massive experience, and the roles that you fulfil mean that you've got a really good perspective on maths education nationally. I mean, you're professor of maths education at the University of Nottingham. You're also the chair of the Joint Mathematics Council, and you're also the founding director of the Observatory for Maths Education at the University of Nottingham. And alongside that as well, you've been involved in ACME for a long time, and you're also part of the Mathematical Futures projects at the Royal Society. So, I don't think there's anybody that's got more sort of overarching perspective on maths education than you have. So, over to you. Perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about the observatory, because it's a really exciting thing. I mean, one thing that's exercised me is that Adrian Smith back in 2004, then again in 2018 or 17 or 18, when his other report came out about post 16, was lamenting the lack of like good data about maths education provision in England, and hopefully that's something that the observatory might be able to help with. But anyway, over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie, and for those generous words about my experience. I've got quite a wide experience, and as you say, we've been going at this for a long time. And these three knotty problems that you've set us to talk about, there are no easy solutions to them. But we'll give it a go. We'll give it a go. Just to add a little bit more about my background. As a secondary maths teacher, having done research on primary to secondary school, moved to the university, worked in teacher education, and then been involved in various projects, including some of the Maths Pathways book work back in the noughties, and then lots of projects in that upper secondary space since that time. So you spend a lot of time looking at maths education and trying to understand how it works as a whole system, as a complex system. And increasingly in my thinking and work, I've leaning on those system thinking ideas, complexity ideas, which help to explain why it's so difficult to make change, but they're not useful in explaining what you might do to make change in the future because of the non-linearity and emergence of complex systems. But the important thing is that you see it as a system and all these things interact with one another. So if you did make progress on recruiting good teachers, you'd probably make progress on attitudes to maths as well. And you'd probably make progress on technology. So all these things sort of work together. And it's not that one is a precursor to the others. They're all sort of precursors to the others and connected. And that's what the observatory is trying to get at. So for over a number of years and with a number of different projects, we've worked with large secondary data sets to try and understand the patterns in our system as a whole. So maths education in England is big, 9 million kids in I don't know, 16,000 schools or whatever it is, and 250,000 primary teachers, 25,000. It's a big project. And we're looking at the whole lot and trying to understand variation within it. We know that schools make a difference. Schools make a difference from the research. We also know that probably teachers within schools make a bigger difference than the variation between schools. So it really matters which teacher you get as well as which school you go to. We know it matters what kind of family background you have and influences at home and the sort of support you have. We know all these factors matter. As well as the curriculum experience you've got and the opportunities to learn and have an enriched experience of mathematics in school. All these things matter. And increasingly, we've been thinking, how do we look at that all together and understand how all those factors play out? So very exciting development here at Nottingham, building on the long history of work through the Shell Centre for Mathematical Education, is to try and do this sort of observing of the whole system, a bit like you have an epidemiological study in health. So we know about the Zoe study that's trying to look at lots of sort of health data at the individual level and understand relationships between outcomes and inputs in terms of what people do with their lives. We want to try and do the same in mathematics education, but obviously it's a structured system with schools and classrooms and teachers and peer groups and so on. So this year, we're starting an ambitious program of research that's going to run for the next 9 years. We've got a 10-year plan to start with. And we know it needs to be that long because that's the sort of time scale that people are in maths education for. They're it takes them 13 years, most young people, to get to the end of their school maths careers, and some go beyond that. So what we're doing is mixing up trend analysis from all the national data sets that we've got, the National Pupil Database, HESA data, longitudinal cohort studies, with our own new research where we're going to generate new data sets. And these are 3 cohort studies in primary, in secondary, and in higher education. These are large. So to give you an example, in secondary schools, we are planning to start with 150 secondary schools across the country, a good sort of random sample that's representative of the country, and follow those year 7 students for 7 years. And try and understand their experiences of mathematics, how their attitudes to mathematics change, why they change, how they're influenced by the schools that they're in, the teachers that they're with, the courses that they do, various of the factors. So we're going to be surveying those students, their teachers. We're going to try and understand something about pedagogy at that scale across those 150 schools. We're going to do some parental surveys from time to time, and importantly, connect all that up so we can see what the relationships are between those various factors, and try and get some purchase on some of these big problems that you posed at the beginning. So we're doing that in secondary, and then we're doing something similar in primary, starting in reception, and we're doing the more nutty problem of starting in year 12 with A-level math students and seeing how that progression happens. So, it's interesting to us and to you, no doubt, although we get increases in A-level math students, we're not really seeing increases in undergraduate math students. What's going on there? What are the choice patterns, and what happens when people go through their undergraduate education? So those 3 cohort studies are going to give us an unprecedented, large-scale, unique insight into what's happening in our maths education system. We don't think anybody globally is doing anything like this, and it gives us the opportunity to answer myriad questions and get hopefully some answers to things that we think matter and make the biggest difference in terms of learner attitudes, engagement, outcomes, progression, choices for mathematics in the future. So it's super exciting, and over the next year or two, there'll be quite a lot of the first flush of analyses from these studies. The other thing we're doing as part of the cohort studies is some case studies at schools. So we're going to go into some secondary schools and primary schools, observe lessons, and importantly, link that work into the bigger cohort study data. So we can say, well, teachers tell us they teach like this, students tell us they experience maths like this. Let's go and watch what actually happens. How do we join all that up to get a really good sense of what's going on in our system? So we can offer some advice to people like yourself, national leaders in maths education, or policymakers, or maybe math leaders and maths leaders, or maybe classroom teachers. Just give different sorts of people some advice on what we can learn about the system when we step back and look at all of it in that way. So there you are, brief summary of the observatory.
But what a fantastic opportunity it is. I mean, one of the frustrations I've worked in trying to improve maths education for most of my career, and a lot of the issues are to do with the things take a long time to do. We're working often on political timescales, trying to have quick fixes for things which don't embed, and how to really kind of understand the system properly so that you can do the right things to improve maths education. Is we haven't in the past, I don't think ever before, have we had the chance to understand it in enough detail to be able to plan those changes. And hopefully what you're doing at Nottingham will result in information that can really help us to make a massive difference. So I'm a massive supporter of it, but on the other hand, I also think it's a very, very hard thing you've taken on. I mean, just you talking about the scope of it is, wow, that's a big job you've taken on, isn't it? And a difficult thing to do. And the other thing about, my background is maths and physics, and unfortunately, education is dominated by human beings, isn't it? And that makes understanding it so much more complicated.
Yeah, I saw a great banner the other day, and it said, "We didn't do this because it would be easy. We did this because we thought it would be easy." And there's a sense in which I'm looking at the increasing levels of complexity and challenge in what we're doing in the observatory, and we're relishing that, but realizing it's really difficult to make sense of this large, complex, interconnected set of data to form really good judgments and get good insights on what we think's happening. But we need to do this because our system is full of very well-meaning, hard-working teachers and leaders trying their best to make improvements, but not really having the best science, the social science.
Yes.
I love the phrase where speaking of maths and physics, that adage where people say, well, there's the hard sciences and then the even harder social sciences.
Exactly. I agree with that completely. Yes.
Yeah. How do you make sense of this mass of people and their different relationships in their different organizational structures, so that you can make some meaningful change going forward? I think there's a nice stat from the Royal Society published something recently, that there's something like the amount of public money spent on research in health is 34 times bigger than the amount of public money in education spent on education research. Sorry, health money on health research compared to education money on education research.
Yeah.
So we really need to do a better job of this sort of large scale connected research that can give us some insights, and then research that's really connected to practice as well, and connected to the problems that people have, the problems that teachers have, that curriculum leaders have, that system leaders have, and the policymakers have. And often those problems that they have aren't the problems that many researchers are interested in. So we're really trying to align what we're doing with what various stakeholder groups are interested in. But we'll see how we go.
It's interesting. I know you also talked about. I know you're involved in the Mathematical Futures project, and that again is. I think that the work in the observatory, having these real data about what's going on in detail, and that hopefully can inform national policy about how maths education develops. But what you're doing with the Royal Society and the Mathematical Futures program, could you say a bit about that as well? Because all these things are kind of linked together, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, the Mathematical Futures Programme, and mathematical rather than mathematics, we spent a long time thinking about that. And the report's due out next week. It's been 4 years in the making, and a lot of hard thinking about a sort of high-level strategic vision for mathematics and or mathematical and data education. There's a definitional challenge in the report where we explore what we mean by mathematical and data education now. And that project set out, this goes back to your point about timescale, Charlie. At the beginning, it was imagining what should maths education look like in 20 years' time? Yeah. Because that timescale is on us already. People being born now that are in their early years in the next few years, and then go through school and do A levels and go to university, that's 20 years away. Yeah. So by the time we have thought about a curriculum review that's happening now with Becky Francis, and we've implemented some of those changes, if all of that were to be done slowly and carefully, it's a 20-year horizon. Yeah. So that was the goal of the Mathematical Futures programme. And there's some really important things in that report, and some of it was presented in a discussion paper early on. Part of that is thinking about what the purposes for maths education are, and being really clear about that. So you and I have had a long involvement in core maths, and before that, use of maths. Yeah. So I've been around for long enough to see something called use of maths. I had about 12,000 people doing it, disappear and die because of, I would say, a misunderstanding of what it was trying to do. Yeah. And then the re-emergence of something else, core maths, that's trying to do quite similar things, and also has got stuck at a level, recruitment level, which is a sort of disappointment when there's so many post-16 students that we think could benefit from that kind of mathematics. So in part of that report, one of the things that the Maths Futures report is talking about is these sort of three big purposes. Yes, developing foundational advanced techniques and methods and concepts. I'll give you like a grammar of mathematics, methods, techniques, procedures. But secondly, and really importantly, developing quantitative literacy. Yeah. The ability to read the world and make sense of the world with mathematics. And you and I think that was really important. I don't like to call it numeracy because in this country, numeracy sounds like it's basic. Yeah. In many countries in the world, numeracy you could have graduate level numeracy, high level numeracy. So that we think that's really important. And then the other thing that we've talked about in the report is domain specific competence. Now, increasingly, we want all teachers to be engaging their students with the mathematical content of their A levels and T levels. Yeah. So how do we think about the mathematical education of young people as being across their curriculum, actually? Yeah. Certainly at A-level, I mean, having mentioned physics, 40% of the A-level physics course is the assessment of the maths and the physics, and similar for many other subjects. So we have many young people in this country doing A-levels, not maths, but they are doing some maths.
Yeah.
So how do we join all that up and think about that in a connected way? So the report's trying to explore that a little bit as well. And of course, it raises the question of maths pathways, which we've been talking about for 20 years since the first report of Adrian Smith. And we haven't got there yet. We're still stuck on this idea that really everybody in education should be enhancing their quantitative literacy, their ability to use maths in the disciplines that they're in, whether it's a T level or an A level, and then just their sort of math skills. Of course, everyone should be improving those things. It stands to reason. We wouldn't say they should be doing that in other areas of communication and use of technology. They should be doing that in maths too, but we haven't found a way of doing it and communicating it clearly, which relates to your first problem about public attitudes to and positivity about learning maths and learning sort of learning, being more positive about maths and the applications and use of mathematics in life. I should pause.
So I think public attitudes to maths, I think that there's a bit of evidence that public attitudes to maths as a discipline are actually pretty strong because people recognise the value of it. But that isn't the same as wanting to. That's like other people are mathematicians doing maths and what they do is important. It's not. My maths education is really important for me personally in the same way, I think. And I'm, core maths and use of maths before it. I think what we're thinking about is to be a kind of a, it's a massive advantage to an individual to be mathematically confident in how they're dealing with the world and being able to apply their maths in the world. It's also massively important to the economy as well to have a workforce that can do that. But how we can make it so that we can get bigger uptake. I mean, you're right. Core maths numbers about 13,000. We've got a funding incentive which has recently been introduced, which hasn't had a chance to take effect yet. Be interested to see what happens there. But then we're into the teacher supply problem as well, aren't we? Which we've already talked about. So all of these things are connected.
Well, and the which teachers? The which teachers problem? Is it maths teachers that teach core maths, or is it really good quantitatively minded economics teachers, biology teachers, geography teachers who know the value and the power of mathematics and of quantitative reasoning and data in their disciplines and can persuade young people pretty well? You need to be better at this stuff. If you want to be a good geographer, and one of my colleagues here is doing some really interesting work on the sort of mix of skills you have if you do particular sets of A levels. So I think that's a really interesting development.
I know the geographers, the people involved in psychology, they're all real great fans of core maths, and it's really just my dream, if you like, is that in an institution there's like a team of people that are teaching post-16 maths. There'll be some mathematicians in there, but there'll also be people from geography and people from economics and people from psychology and biology. Just all this idea that maths pervades everything. Once you've got your kind of competence in maths that you're learning, pre-primary school and early secondary, and then there comes a point where there are different pathways that you're going to want to take. Absolutely. And you're going to need different types of maths maybe for those pathways. But there's a kind of core of maths that is really valuable for everybody to be effective citizens, effective people in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those sort of foundational math skills. I mean, there are some studies that suggest if most people had what you've learnt at primary school, but you understood it really well, conceptually, technically, procedurally. If you could take that math, if everybody had that maths in society, nailed down, well, for a start, nobody would have to do a GCSE reset. You'll pass. And the ability to use that when you see COVID stats, when you're thinking about whether you're thinking about data in your social media feed, that would be, that proportional reasoning that comes with that would be massively advantageous for everyone. So we often get a bit distracted by more harder maths that no one really knows. Well, including myself, some of that maths that I learned in my A levels and my degree, and I think, I've never used that, but I use a lot of mathematical thinking in my day-to-day work. The point you just made reminds me of some work we did in the Royal Society's advisory committee on the general mathematical competencies. The bit that went into the T level. So we were asked through Adrian Smith and on Acme, how do we advise the government on what maths should be in the T levels? And we said, well, we need a framework so that all people teaching all T levels across colleges can have a sort of common language and can talk about how are we collectively developing the mathematics skills of people across vocational and technical routes. And that we produced the GMCs to try and do that. And we've been in some college where they'll say, we can have conversations around the GMCs and everyone being a teacher of mathematical competencies in a way that we can't get people to support GCSE resit.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of gets at this question about attitudes to maths.
It
I
does.
think
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
problems is attitudes to school maths.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a point I think feel very strongly about is that many young people, their parents, often their teachers as well, feel that it's almost like the purpose of studying maths is to get a grade 4 or above in your GCSE, and then you can say, thank goodness for that, it's out of the way. Not the purpose of studying maths is it's a fantastic transferable tool that I can use in work and life, and it's going to be really valuable to me. And if we can get that message across, and I think that another factor in this is that learning maths to do maths problems, and learning maths to be able to then apply those transferable skills in context is that's a different thing. And I think that we need to make sure that we're, you know, very really strong foundation of maths, but then being able to, in our education, key stage 4, post 16, making sure that everybody also has the chance to learn how to really apply those skills, and then they can see the value of them. I think that when I think it becomes a problem is when it seems to be everybody's goal that you pass a maths exam, not everybody's goal that you are able to go out into the world, be able to use maths confidently.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point in the Royal Society's work about this notion of domain-specific competence. Yeah. You and I know that if you go and look at the A-level psychology course, those A-level psychologists will be learning some statistical things that they'll never learn in maths. We'd call them maths and data. They might have one time been as part of an A-level. They're not now. You learn it in psychology or in geography. So and even in mechanics, when even in physics, when you're learning more than mechanics, you're probably getting a much stronger sense of what that's for and why it works in physics than you are in maths. And that's a real challenge for us. We see it at the universities as well. So people go off into the disciplines. They have to learn how to use mathematical and data thinking and techniques within their domains. And that's a problem for us because we want to sort of have this very tight, nicely controlled knowledge structure, which is mathematics that leads you to being a kind of world famous algebraicist, for example. But we also want a very flat, useful maths that you can apply in lots of places. But the research tells us that the situated cognition, it's very difficult to take something that you've learned in one context and just kind of do it somewhere else. We know that's really hard. And I suspect that there are many teachers out there. And I remember being a secondary teacher when that middle level GCSE group that you're struggling to motivate say, what's the point of doing this, sir? Yeah. And you don't want to say, because it's on your GCSE. Yep. But that's kind of the best answer you've got. And that is useful and it's right. And of course, if people get a 4 or a 7, whatever they need to do A-level sciences, that's really important as a gatekeeper for them. Yeah. But it's not important as a motivator and as a parent of the future for them to say, maths has been really important to me, and it will be for you kids. You should do well at this.
I think that is one of the problems, isn't it? That perhaps. I mean, another thing, I used to teach a huge amount of A-level maths back in the 1990s, which is aging me a bit, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, me too, Charlie.
But back when I was teaching a huge amount of A-level maths, A-level students do ask what's the point of question as well. And sometimes the best answer you can give is that if you take this study further, this is going to be absolutely crucial to you. But at the moment, I can't really give you a kind of a point that is going to be meaningful to you. On the other hand, so what you need somehow is with people that are taking that maths route, you also need to kind of foster a love of mathematics for its own sake as well. And absolutely, because then learning more maths and more techniques, understanding things, even if you can't see any immediate application, is still really rewarding.
Yeah. And you know that works for
both of those things.
Yeah, you know that works for some people, having a love of mathematics, because you and I spent our careers in maths education because of that. But that doesn't work for everyone, and that can't be a motivation for everyone. And so understanding those different motivations for different learners is really important. And if we assume they will all be motivated in the same ways that maths teachers are, it is probably not going to work.
Yeah. So it goes back to your work with the Observatory and actually really trying to understand this properly, with real children and real classrooms, but with teachers, the teachers that we have teaching those children, and how we can understand what that means for their motivation, and are there ways that we can, even if you're not somebody who instinctively enjoys maths for its own sake, that you recognise how valuable it is, and therefore you're wanting to study it further.
Yeah, we've done some pilot work with our Year 7 surveys that we're going to have in the spring, which then we're hoping to have 25 to 30,000 kids complete them. We've just got 400 students. one of the things that struck me was they're really positive about, in response to a question that goes something like, well, I've got it here somewhere. Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Being good at maths will help me in my future job.
Yeah.
Many of them say really positive things about that. But maths helps me with learning other subjects. They're not so clear about that.
That's
So
interesting, isn't it?
that's in year 7.
Yeah.
And admittedly, there might not be lots of maths in their science or geography or whatever. But it'll be interesting over time. We want to see, does that change when they get to GCSEs and A levels? Does it change for certain kinds of learners?
Yeah.
We can, as teachers, we can say, oh, your maths will be useful for helping you with the subjects. But if the students don't get it and they don't really believe it, then we've got to change our message. And I think that messaging is really important. One of the things, you were at the launch of our report on the maths pipeline, and we were thinking about these problems. How do you engage and motivate, particularly key stage 3 learners, which is where we lose so many capable mathematicians who just get switched off for all kinds of complex reasons. And one of the things we talked about, it was something similar to what was generated here in the chemistry department, which is the periodic table of elements, where you have like a material scientist and a scientist and various people talking about why a particular element is cool. Why is this interesting? So you might have somebody talking about why titanium's important, because you can have really strong lightweight bikes. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got a titanium bike. This is kind of cool. And we suggested we could do with something the equivalent of that. So when you as the A-level teacher is asked, well, why do we need to learn this bit of calculus? You can go to a really good, well-designed, short, set of videos on people who use those things in context. The kind of people that those 17-year-olds might look at and go, oh, that's actually quite cool. I get it. I'm happy with the delayed gratification of knowing that it might be useful later on, because that's persuaded me. And I suspect that many teachers, like me, I did my degree and went straight into teaching. I didn't have a career in industry. And even if I had a short career in industry, I'd only been in one form of industry. So I wouldn't have had that breadth of experience. But helping teachers to understand why all this powerful mathematics is useful in so many different domains would be really important, I think. And I don't think we do that. And I expect most maths teachers, compared to most scientists and most English teachers, who probably maintain an interest in the discipline themselves, I suspect many maths teachers, especially those who don't come from a disciplinary background, don't have that sort of fascination with how is maths being used in the world, and how is data changing the way we think about commerce or where we shop, or how we manage our future pensions, or whatever it might be. We're not doing that. And I think there's something about perhaps helping the teachers to understand why is this stuff beyond the sort of rhetoric that we all have about its value and benefit to individuals and society.
I suppose it's linked a bit back to this thing's a bit back to what you were talking about, mathematical futures, doesn't it? About sort of linking data science and computing and everything in how mathematics fits in with those and serves them, and how what dependencies are, and how things are underpinned by mathematics. But it's that's something you can talk about to other educationalists. But how can you get that idea across to children in the classroom? So that and can we influence their attitudes in that way as well?
Yeah, this is a challenge, and I mean, that much of our maths curriculum, I mean, not the sort of pedagogy and the actual curriculum experience, much of the content hasn't changed over a very long time. I mean, you mentioned physics. I went and looked at the A-level physics papers. I'm quite surprised by how much kind of new physics is in there since I did my physics A-level. We don't have that sense in maths. So some way of kind of energizing, it's not so much the foundational and advanced techniques and concepts you're learning, but understanding how the world is changing and the uses of that stuff is changing. We could do with doing a better job of that, I think. In ways that inspire teachers to have really good answers for those questions. Why am I? And maybe sometimes we look at areas of the curriculum and go, do you know what? Lots of people don't do much interesting with this. Maybe we should think about the balance of the curriculum and what we prioritize and what really motivates and inspires them. Something you said earlier reminded me of an experience I had a number of years ago at a big conference in America. Where a group of 17-year-old students from a school serving a poor Black Latino area of Chicago, they were there at this conference, really full of professors and senior academics from around the world, and they're presenting on how they use their maths in their equivalent of a core maths program. to tackle some of the problems that bothered them. And the guy that designed their course, and they didn't have sort of terminal assessments like we'd have, and there's much more flexibility. It's a different kind of regime. Students would say there were the three big problems that they really cared about. So it might be gentrification of our community, increased stop and search of black kids, the rise of STIs, could have been something about climate. So they come up with a number of meaty topics about things that mattered. And then the teacher would add some more in, and then design a curriculum. So take the mathematics you need to learn and think about how you learn it, motivated by those problems. And what we saw were these 17-year-olds standing in a conference presenting on how they'd modelled. I can't remember what it was. I think it was a sort of how house prices are changing in their community as the community gets gentrified, and what that means in terms of pushing the local people out and reducing their access to services, etc., etc. Really good data analysis, really good modelling, which they presented to the mayor of Chicago, who then done something about it. I have a funny feeling those students would never say, "Oh, I didn't get the point of doing all this maths." They would say, "You can do powerful stuff if you can use these tools and this data to say important things about the world and make a difference."
I suppose what I'll say about that, though, is that I don't think that I think what you want is to equip those young people were equipped with some tools beforehand that enable them to then fly with it when they were given a context in which to use them, and we've got to get that interface right between learning, understanding the tools, if you like, and then being able to use the tools. And that's a curriculum problem, isn't it, as well?
And that balance is always tricky, isn't it? Because you can spend all your time learning how to use every tool in the box. It doesn't make you an artisan.
Yes.
You know how to use all the tools in the box. You might not be able to make anything with it.
Exactly.
You can use all the tools in the box. So that balance is really tricky. And you and I, there'll be people who'll focus on learning more hard techniques because one day you're going to need them for something else. And people say, no, you don't need the quantitative literacy argument from the sort of US is no, you need a lower level of mathematics, higher level of sophistication and application. The computational thinking argument, you might say, well, computers can do most of the computing. What you need is really good conceptual understanding. So you know what's going on when it's doing those calculations. So you don't need less maths, you need actually more understanding. You just need to practice less. You need to understand the techniques and tools. So this tension of what you prioritize is really important. And one of the things in that Maths Futures report is we're trying to create a language, I think, that will help people to have the discussion and understand why sometimes we say we all agree, but we kind of disagree. I remember Celia Hoyles many years ago talking to Andy saying, maths teachers and maths teachers always agree about everything in maths education until you start talking about curriculum. And then they start disagreeing, because that's when their deeper sort of values and purposes and interests come to the surface. And we all have those. And you and I have seen that over the years, that sort of the tussle over the A-level reforms. You can't not have stats in it, and you can't not let go of this, and everyone wants their bit in it, and everyone's kind of so curriculum's always challenging, and you have to make choices, and it's always political. But it's not. Go back right to the beginning of the conversation. It's connected into everything else. It relates to attitudes. It relates to how you teach it. It relates to teacher workforce.
I think that point about attitudes is a really important one. It is something that really frustrates me. This idea of, so as I've said it before, but the idea that the purpose of maths education for many people, for the large majority, I suspect, is what the main thing they're thinking about is I've got to pass this exam, and then and that that it's not about the value of the maths itself in terms of their work and life, but you're right that some people will love maths for its own sake. It's important to spark those people, but lots of people won't. But you still got to spark in those people the desire to have a real level of competence. One thing that I think has changed, there's all these cliches about it's nobody wants to admit they can't read, but they will say they're rubbish at maths. I don't think that's nearly as true anymore as it used to be. I think that there's a bit of change around that. I think people do want to feel competence in maths, and that's a positive shift.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I also think maybe with maths there might be a gap between what people say about maths, and what people really believe about its value. I mean, I think there's enough, and I don't mean school maths. I mean that broader, being able to use important mathematical concepts and processes and ideas to make sense of the world around you. So we do know that if you've got better levels of mathematical literacy, you're better able to make health choices,
Yeah.
financial choices. You participate in democracies in a different way because you understand the claims around data. We know all these things are good. And I think probably people know that. They probably understand if they run a small business.
Yeah.
And if their maths is good, that probably helps them. I think people know that. But that's slightly different from school maths.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that sort of story for those people, not for the people who need those A-level techniques to go and do engineering and physics and mathematics and economics, if they're those kind of courses, but everyone who needs the ability to read the world with mathematics and data.
It's interesting actually. We were doing some work around when there was all the debate around maths to age 18, and one of the things that came out from evidence from employers in there is that some people limit their career aspirations. They personally limit themselves because they are concerned about their ability to deal with, the higher up the ladder you go, generally speaking, the more quantitative stuff you have to deal with, and that sometimes is a barrier for people progressing.
Yeah, I think that's right. It might partly explain that research, historical research, some of which we've done about those wage returns to people with A levels that have maths and not maths. That there is a kind of filtering when you get to senior levels of business and industry, which is being able to make sense of a spreadsheet, understand a model, think structurally about logistical flows, and all those things that are deeply mathematical, and not being scared of them. And I heard something recently from somebody in one of the big consultancy firms who said, "Well, I'm not a maths person, but I use numbers every day."
Yes.
Well, you are then, aren't you?
Yeah.
What they mean is I don't associate somebody who liked or was good at school maths. So we've got a sort of PR job to do in a way.
Yeah. So, in fact, something else around what you were just saying is we know the gender split for A-level maths and further maths been, lots of work has gone into try to shift it, but it hasn't shifted. It's a bit less than 40% of A-level maths candidates are girls, a bit less than 30% of further maths candidates, and so there's that's limiting what can be achieved by some people in terms of them. Some I think some young women are limiting what they might achieve by the choices that are being made. And why are those choices being made? How can we shift that?
Yeah, it's one of the things we want to do in the Observatory, Charlie. So that often you and I were thinking about the system nationally. We have these reference points, these sort of, we homogenise the whole system and talk about 40-60 in A-level maths.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, are there schools where it's 50-50? Are there enough schools where it's 50-50?
Yeah.
But boys, all things equal, same prior qualifications, same attainment level, so they genuinely have chosen with equal likelihood. And then to say, well, okay, if out of our 150 secondaries, about 110 of them might have sixth forms, and then we're going to look at sixth forms as well. If we can find some places where it isn't 60-40, it's 50-50, we want to say, so what are the conditions here? What through years 7 to 11?
Yeah.
And is it, as I heard one ex-head of maths say, well, I would always put the young, trendy female teachers teaching the top groups in year 11 and year 12. And I think that makes a difference. Well, and of course, everyone's got their informal theories.
Yeah.
But what we can do with an observatory is you can start to say, over large populations, can we see if that's really true?
I think the observatory is so powerful from that point of view. I mean, through the Advanced Maths 4 programme, a bit of work has been done around what is it that, if you see a school that's got relatively high portions of girls doing A-level maths, what is it? And the conclusion seems to be it's kind of like a whole school thing. It's not something that's a maths type thing. But but those kinds of studies are, and then you think, well, if it's a whole school thing, that's so hard to change. But the studies are limited. There's the scale of what the observatory can do can really make a big difference to understand these things really deeply, I think.
Yeah, there's sort of long history of school effectiveness research, and my sort of critique of it, if you like, is that often we get characteristics of school that are effective and school that are not effective. Yeah. But what we don't get so much is how did they get to be effective?
Yeah.
Right? So because what you're interested then is saying, well, how do we get this school from here over here? Yeah. And we kind of know some things about that, but we're not particularly good at it. Same for a maths department. Yeah. So a very early piece of work that I did in using the National Pupil Database in schools across the Midlands could show that there are some departments for the same kids make a whole grade difference from 11 to 16. Well, they're doing something over 5 years. And for your A-level girls' participation in A-level problem, it doesn't start in year 11, 10. It starts in year 7.
Yeah.
So what are they doing over time? What are those characteristics? And can we understand the flow of that? Can you see it in the data? Can you? Because what we'll be able to do is when we find those let's say we've got a school in 5-6 years' time that's got that really good mix of boys and males and female students in year 12, we'll be able to go back and say, what did they say about maths in year 7? Who was teaching them in year 7? What was the curriculum experience?
Yeah.
Can we see where the roots of this success come from? Because then we can start to say, well, that's what we need to work on in Key Stage 3 to try and achieve this goal down the line. And I think that's super exciting, but it's slow. It's slow, careful work. There's no quick fixes, as you and I know, because we still talk about the same things.
My reason for picking those three areas is because I know they're kind of that they've been over time, they've been intractable, but we need to sort them out, don't we? You can't say you can't put it in the too hard drawer. It's something that we need to deal with. And one of the things that, again, and a reason why I was really keen to speak to you personally is this observatory idea that maybe we can actually start to do something real with this now.
Yeah. My dearly departed colleague, the late great Malcolm Swan, and I used to have we used to have a disagreement. And I would say, you need to understand something before you can try and change it. And he would say, no, you need to just change it before you can understand it. Yeah. And of course, both are true.
Both are true, exactly. Yes.
What we are very much about, and historically, the Shell Centre tried to change things and then understand that change process. And sometimes those things worked well, and sometimes they worked less well. And then that was generally the motivation. It was designing for change at the sort of, as Hugh Burkhardt would say, at the sort of tactical and technical level. What we're thinking about is understanding the system at a sort of strategic level so that can then inform your tactics for change, for improvement, and so on. And quite often when we get these, well-meaning national reports on the state of things and what you need to do, we don't have enough insight about how the system works to know quite what to do about it. Lots of people like me and you and many others working very hard on the basis of our partial understanding or limited understanding, trying to do things that matter, and sometimes making a difference and sometimes making less of a difference than we would have liked. But we're hoping we can bring a different kind of evidence. So it's not a trial-based evidence like EVE, which has its place. It's not the kind of accretion of small studies. It's building up to kind of a sort of wisdom about what happens, which is also its place. It's this sort of this set of interconnected pieces of research that hopefully will give us some good insights and places to start working where we think actually we have a good chance of making this work. So you know from our focus on EVE trials sort of mirrors medicines research. Not public health research, because that's slightly different. That's much messier, but medicines research. Normally this massive investment in the models of change and the chemistry of the body, and so we know this mechanism works. Now we need to say whether this treatment will work at scale and what the risks are and so on. Whereas we don't have that massive investment in the pre-trial work. So often we're trialing things that we don't really know how well they work before we trial them, and it turns out they don't really work that well. So what we're trying to do is offer something that will start to give those mechanisms. Oh, look, in these schools where they do these things in Key Stage 3, you don't get a massive opening of the gap between the poorest and the richest kids. It stays quite close. Or in these kinds of schools that have this makeup of teachers or this extracurricular enrichment activity, we see that more girls stay in the maths pipeline as the boys. They're the things we need to now trial and see. Let's see if you deliberately change it. It is causal. Rather than being associative.
If you can do it at sufficient scale, I think that becomes possible. And I think that we've been talking about the continuum between you and Malcolm. I'm probably more on the Malcolm end, but I've been more on the Malcolm end mainly because I think I can't understand this. I haven't got the information that's going to enable me to understand it in a way which means I can be so systematic about how I want to change it. So what I've got to use is a combination of common sense and the information that we can get. And when I say common sense, I mean it's the sense of a lot of experience in maths education from a team of people thinking about how we think we can shift things in the right direction. And we're kind of
Yeah.
To have that extra information from large scale work can just make that a much more efficient process, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, Malcolm was brilliant at what he did. So you sort of slightly, when you work with him, you're slightly overawed, and you think,
Yeah,
oh, I can't do that, but I can do something else. And actually, we need different kinds of expertise and different kinds of knowledge
yeah,
to work together to inform what we do. Yeah. So I mean, the other second point that you were talking about was teachers.
yeah,
Of course, we will say there's a sort of chronic problem with teacher supply
yeah,
and retention, and we know that. I remember when I started here at Nottingham it's probably 2001 and 2 in our teacher education program. We had an offset inspection, and the person that did that inspection talked about the challenge of finding really strong departments for teachers to go and learn in, because they might have had some really good teachers, lots of very hard-working teachers,
yeah,
but there's a difference between the strength in depth in a maths department
yeah,
compared to in a history department. I think was the subject he came from. He said, well, generally everyone's outstanding. I mean, I'm generalising.
yeah,
And his point back then, over 20 years ago, was a problem that's 20 years old.
yeah, exactly.
So it's not one generation. It goes well back beyond
Yeah,
your career.
yeah, yeah. I suspect it may have got worse though, and that's yeah,
I think you're probably right, and I think there's a number of things there, aren't there? There's the sort of attracting and training and transitioning teachers into the profession, and so they'll stick, which is a challenge. I mean, our numbers here at Nottingham are quite a bit lower this year than they've been in past years, and I don't think we're unusual. There's the challenge of retaining good teachers. You know, if every teacher that left after X years, we could get them to stay in for 2X years,
yes,
that would make a massive difference. And then we have to develop and enrich and support the teachers we've got, increasingly effective. I know you do a lot of work to do that, but understanding what the best ways of doing that are is really important, and bringing together all the research evidence on that is vital. And then like the boys girls split in A-level, and we're interested in looking at the variation between regions, between school types. We're interested in that with teachers as well. So can we understand from our, for example, again, the secondary schools, from our 150 secondary schools and maybe 1,500 teachers, maybe 1,200 teachers in year 7, can we understand who are these teachers in these schools? Yeah. How are they being supported? Are they likely to leave next year? What are the conditions in those different schools that might be influencing those factors? Is it something to do with the departmental culture, the school culture, whether they're in this type of math or that type of math? Can we start to see some of those patterns by looking at scale and by linking our data to other data sets as well, such as the school workforce census? But also, you then link that to the student data and say, well, if we look across all of our classes, across all of these 150 schools, we see some of these classes just enjoying maths a lot more.
Yeah.
What's that got to do with the teacher?
Yeah.
Now, what can we see? Well, there are types of teacher that seem to have students that get the value of maths more. Well, then we want to go and look at what's going on in those classrooms and try and see if we can make sense of what's happening there. So I think the Observatory can also give us some different kinds of pointers to the sorts of people and practices and environments that create more positive attitudes, more engaged learners, better outcomes over time, better choices for A-level maths. You know, we can look at what those teacher factors are and try and use that to help explain what's happening. And I'm particularly interested in the variation between schools.
Yeah,
I was very lucky. I started off in a school in South Nottingham, where for years they'd been involved in developing work for the Shell Centre. My first head of department was Sue Pope. We had a fantastic, rich culture of talking about mathematics, of developing interesting teaching and learning projects. Most teachers don't have an experience like that. You know, my first mentor when I was teacher training spent years writing SMP materials. You know, I was just surrounded by fantastic people. I think you probably had a similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
How do we get more people to have a bit of that experience? Technology should should be useful for these things, creating good networks of teachers and different kinds of support and inspiration for them. But how we do that, I don't know. So that variation between schools, between regions, between school types, and how that then impacts on learner attitudes, motivations, outcomes, progression. We think we can do some work on in there.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of talking direct shop for a minute. I think there's great opportunities to work with the maths hubs over that type of study. So
Yeah.
that might be something we can talk about. But yeah. Again, you're again talking about though the strength of having this sort of dedicated projects that's going to look at these things in real detail, because you know, we and inform how we do try to solve these problems in a way that is more than just sort of accumulated experience and common sense, but which is actually, you know, what is really happening on the ground in schools.
Yeah. And you know, as I do, that our education system has got a bit more complex over the last period of time.
Just a bit, yeah.
It's no longer so easy to work in the sort of footprint areas that you have in the hubs, where you have new school structures emerging, some mats that are more or less engaged in, or more or less insular, maybe, in terms of their support for mathematics education. I mean, great that they're investing in supporting mathematics teaching and learning within those mats, but it does make it challenging to create sort of consistent approaches to professional development, to retention, to sort of workforce planning. Of course, everyone's working really hard to do the best they can. We just need to learn from those different approaches and try and have something that results in better experiences for more learners. It's just challenging, and that's the same problem with technology. You know, technology use. You'll always find fantastic pockets of best practice, and often those people get wheeled out to sort of talk about how wonderful things are. That isn't what happens in most places. And that challenge of working across a sort of fragmented system. I mean, something we worked on in a piece of work for the Wellcome Trust. It was a nice, the Equals project. Equity and quality in I can't remember the rest of it, in local learning landscapes. We were sort of thinking about how do you do professional development for this? In this case, it was primary maths teachers. How do you do that when the local authorities' relationship to maths, relationship to hubs, relationship to teaching schools, it's just complicated now. And as a maths teacher, as a school leader, as a hub leader, as a local authority maths person, if there are any left, navigating that complex space is really, really tricky. And that's one of the challenges that you and I are faced with, me from a research point of view, and you from a sort of system change perspective. How do you navigate all of that? Challenging.
No, but I think, I mean, so it's really exciting that this is happening at the observatory. I'm really pleased it's you that's leading it, because I think that's really kind of you know, somebody with you know, such a long experience and such a kind of a place within the maths education community. I think it's a really powerful thing, and I think that we need to make sure that we're, you know, lots and lots of people are passionate about maths education, wanting to make it work, and we've got to make sure that we're kind of, you know, communicating properly with each other and trying to move it forward, because these challenges are big. They've been there for a long time, as we said, but actually, you know, I'm a terrible optimist. I always feel that you know, we can do something about this. We've just got to get people pointing in the right direction with a real will to do it. And I think that the work of the observatory in particular, and the Mathematical Future stuff we have for the Royal Society, all of those things are, you know, they are trying to address this issue that we've got about how important maths is in society, how we need to make sure that society understands it, that maths education is so important to society as well, and that we want people to have a, you know, really positive attitude to that too. And the more information we can have, the more we can talk to each other about it, and the more we can hopefully influence national policy with government and things as well, the better we'll be. But thanks very much, Andy, for your time. It's been
You're welcome.
Fascinating.
Lovely to talk to you, Charlie.
And the thing that we might talk about another time actually is the in more detail about the stuff around actually using math technology in the classroom to help teach the mathematics. And that's I think probably a separate thing that needs some thinking about as well. But we've covered so much stuff, haven't we? That I think we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, one of the things we like to do with the technology piece is if we can identify schools as we go through year 7 and 8 that are really doing interesting, innovative things, or have made changes and still remember how they did it, we can go and do case study work in those schools to try and understand what their change process was and what they think the impact's been.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've had this. Lots of reports have identified similar things actually around where it works. It's been driven by enthusiasts and it can be really effective. But in other places, it's hardly used at all. How do you get from one to the other? And is there a way of making it so that there's a kind of a uniformly strong use of technology in helping children to learn mathematics?
Yeah. You describe yourself as an optimist, and I describe myself as an enthusiastic skeptic. So I think the enthusiasm is about the fact that you've got to believe you can make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from a researcher perspective, I have to be skeptical about how easy it is to make a difference. And what that drives me to is thinking really hard about the mechanisms for change and understanding those so that you give yourself the best chance of doing the design, system change design or curriculum design or technology use design that is most likely to work and most likely to make a difference. So I think your optimism and my enthusiastic skepticism are actually quite well aligned. They're two sides of the same coin.
Well, I think in a way maybe they reflect what we do as well to some extent. Perhaps,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that having an enthusiastic skeptic leading the observatory is the right thing, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Well, it's nice to talk to you, Charlie.
Yeah,
we'll speak again soon, no doubt.
Yeah, let's stop there. So Andy Noyes, thanks very much. I'll stop recording there.
Thank you.